Welcome back to Rare Elvis Photos. This is Joe Sands with Rare Elvis Photos, and we started reading the real controversial book that was written by Steve Dunleavy and supposedly Red and Sonny West and Dave Hebler. One of those books that I haven't read in 2 decades, maybe at least. I think the last time I read this, I might have been maybe even 30 years. My goodness. And one of the reasons why we're reading this book is really to defend Elvis and who he was versus who Steve Dunleavy and perhaps Red and Sonny and Dave put in this book. If you don't know much about it, Red West and Sonny West, of course, bodyguards and friends, and they were cousins, but the friends of Elvis, supposedly. Wrote this book after they got fired. And they've said that Steve Dunleavy turned it all around and made it horrible. But then, on the flip side, later on, and as they wrote chapters in another book, they said that everything they put in there was true. So, I don't know. We're going to read it. We're going to see exactly, we're going to try to remember what was put in here. I'm going to skip over some of the stupid stuff that maybe, just in case Steve says some really nasty things about Elvis, I'm not going to read those. I don't think that does any good. But we just got done talking about how Elvis wanted Mike Stone, in a sense, removed from the situation, supposedly in 1973. All right, so here we go. We just finished that section, and we're gonna start right now. Dave Hebler was 35 at the time. He was a 5th degree black belt karate champion, and he had not yet started to work for Elvis. That trip was yet to come, but he was one of the many karate fraternity that always had a place among Presley's circle of friends. He was driving Presley in a Mercedes up to his mansion on Montville Road in Beverly Hills, and they were talking. Hebler had just split with his wife. He recalls, Elvis had just come back from the Vegas trip, so I guess it must have been about March of 1973. I heard a lot of talk among the boys about the night Elvis had asked to have Mike Stone removed. Elvis and I had built up a rapport, and we both shared the experience of having split with our wives. We sort of talked about it on common ground. The problems you go through, the way you miss the kids, all that sort of stuff. But I got the distinct impression that the conversation was leading up to something about Mike Stone. Now, before we continue here, I don't know if you remember Elvis and Red West, the conversation that Red West taped of Elvis in '76 to try to trap Elvis, in a sense. That's why he recorded it. And Elvis said that that Dave Hebler really fooled him, and that he was a snake. Now, Elvis didn't talk badly about Red on the call to him, but he did talk bad about Dave Hebler. A snake. A sneaky snake. So, is that because he felt like Dave purposely built a rapport up with Elvis to get in to the Elvis circle and then betrayed him 3 years later? Something to think about while we're reading this book, all right? Dave Hebler is one of the most dedicated karate talents in the country. From his involvement in the art, Dave knew Mike Stone very well. Stone, for his 180 pounds, is one of the most furious karate experts in the United States. He is a quiet, good-looking young man from Hawaii, and of 90 top-class karate matches, he had not lost a single fight. He looked after his body at all times and was well-liked in the Los Angeles karate circle. See, he made a modest living as an instructor, which suited his modest habits. Elvis knew that Mike Stone and Dave Hebler knew each other well. Dave recalls, that talk about removing Mike Stone was pretty disturbing. Now, I did not know Elvis then like I do now, and I was sort of disappointed that he could even think in those terms. First up, knowing Red and Sonny, I knew they had quite a bit of respect for Mike Stone as well. They didn't want to get mixed up in that rubbish. From what they knew of Stone, they liked the guy. Secondly, let's face it, that kind of talk is pretty heavy stuff, even for guys like us who've been around a bit. Just because things don't fall your way, you don't go asking about hiring somebody to remove somebody, for gosh sake. And thirdly, the whole thing that could have gotten very, very nasty. Mike Stone's a pretty quiet guy, but believe me, if he had heard a word about this going on, he might have turned around into a very bad dude. He's the kind of guy that would say, man, if you're looking for me, well, here I am. And if that happened, there's no question in my mind that Mike Stone would have ripped Elvis apart. You remember when those guys jumped up on stage and attacked Elvis? Elvis, I think, and I don't know whether it's going to be in this book or somewhere else or nowhere, Elvis, I think, thought it might be Mike Stone's people. Now, is it maybe was that possibly a little paranoia since he had supposedly talked to Red and Sonny about it, and maybe he thought maybe it got back to Mike? I don't know. I didn't really. Why would I ask Mike about that? Because first off, if Mike would have had that done, he wouldn't have said to me that he did. Think about it. But what do y'all think about that? Do you remember that episode? Obviously, that's kind of somewhat of a famous moment in Elvis's life. Kicking these guys' butts on stage. All right, let's continue on. Of course, Dave Hebler had known the problem. He knew that Mike Stone was the man who took Priscilla Presley away from Elvis. Which isn't true. Priscilla was jumping around, hopping and everything at that point in time. That she could possibly, so she could feel alive, supposedly. So she could escape Elvis, from her own words. She'd been a caged canary for too long. She'd longed for a normal life around normal people, doing normal things. She'd found it in a darkly handsome karate instructor, and Dave knew the situation very well. In fact, a few days before Elvis tried to draw him into this conversation about Mike Stone, Dave had been talking to Mike Stone and Priscilla at Orange County College in Westminster, Orange County, at a karate tournament. See, Priscilla, the beautiful little army brat, who for more than a decade had one of the world's most glamorous fortunes at her fingertips, was dressed simply in a pair of jeans and a blouse. She was giggling and laughing like a cheerleader at her first football game. Yeah, because she still had a credit card. She still had checks. She wasn't cut off at that point in time. I doubt it, because, well, actually, let's go back here. If this was 1973, she had just gotten, I think she might have just sued Elvis for a second fortune. She'd gotten money and blew through it really quick. Like, because she's a phenomenal businesswoman, right? Just blew through it. It's gone. So her attorney sued Elvis and claimed fraud and got a lot more money. Elvis had to sell his publishing, all that stuff. All right, so she supposedly was dressed simply in a pair of jeans and a blouse. Guess what? That's what people wear. What a genius little author this little tiny dude, Steve Dunleavy, is. He's this small to me. Just a jerk. She was giggling and laughing like a cheerleader at her first football game. She was standing at the door of the tournament, stamping the hands of paying customers who came in. And she was a very sweet girl, and so was Mike. Very, very natural, Dave recalls. So this was Priscilla Presley. And here she is stamping hands at her boyfriend's tournament. She was just helping out her struggling karate instructor boyfriend, who I guess in those days, in a good week, would have been making $250. Maybe that was what bugged Elvis so much. if she'd run off with some handsome, sorry, if she'd run off with someone like Frank Sinatra, maybe, somehow that would have erased the hurt ego. I don't know. But a $250 a week karate instructor, that must have hurt. And on top of that, let's talk about this. Elvis loved martial arts. He studied. He was going to open up a dojo. Or he did. He got a lot of different black belts from King Ree and other folks. I think 8th or 9th degree black belt. So it wasn't just Priscilla leaving Elvis for a guy, or a guy that made $250 a week. She left Elvis for somebody that was more well regarded than something he did when it came to karate. Mike Stone, obviously 90-0. Bruce Lee couldn't even beat him. It was a draw in a private match. But nobody beat him in competition. World champion, national champion. And that's going to sting anybody's pride, no matter who you are, because Elvis really, he loved karate, probably almost as much as he loved singing. So let's continue on now. Red West believes that Dave is only partly right. Now, there's no doubt that his ego was very badly hurt. It happened right before our eyes. We knew what was going on when he didn't even know. Now, I don't blame her for leaving Elvis, said Red. She had a life that no normal woman could put up with. But I do know that he loved that woman. Even today, he would never have said a word against her. He always told me I will always have a love for Priscilla. In fact, deep down, I believe that Priscilla was the only one of two people he ever really did love in his whole life. He didn't love us. We thought he did, but he did love that woman, Priscilla. Now, let me tell you something else here. Here's what we know now that Red didn't know then. Elvis was under threat, according to Suzanne Finstad and a lot of people around and sources, was made to marry Priscilla, or it would have been scandal. Curry Grant, Currie Grant. If you haven't seen the video series of Child Bride, click on Joe Sims Rivera's photos, go to playlist, and click on the Child Bride series and watch it. Curry told Priscilla's parents that Elvis had another girl, another woman. He wasn't going to marry Priscilla. And they made a phone call. One of the reasons Elvis would have said, don't say anything about Priscilla. Excuse me. Well, I might have to go back and edit this. Maybe not. But one of the reasons why he would have said, don't say anything about Priscilla, is anything that came out from Elvis that was negative about Priscilla would have been perceived in a sense of breach of contract, probably. And guess what Priscilla could have said? What could she have came out and said since she broke free of Elvis and she's with Mike Stone? She could have brought up the fact of her age, the things that Currie Grant said that they did back then, and it would have been scandal. It would have been scandal. So I think that's one of the huge reasons Elvis refused to tell her with a private investigator, because what would she have done? She would have went to her daddy, the Air Force guy, who in a sense held Elvis in a vice grip because of this. The information that he knew that was given to him by Currie Grant. Now, I've never heard that theory out there, but what I know is that the fear that Elvis probably felt that pushed him into the marriage here, of having everything ripped away from him, Priscilla did hold the power. She held the power. Sorry, I'm a little messy and disheveled today. Did hold the power. Let me button this up. For Elvis and his reputation. All she had to do was just call her daddy. And her daddy would have done the dirty work for her. Her stepdaddy. Anybody ever think about that? We're going to continue reading here. Leave you guys some time to stick a comment down there. All right, we're on to chapter 2 now. Humes High School was one of those drab three-story relics of the South's 19th century past. It was a dull, brown brick building. It stood forbiddingly on Manassas Street in Memphis, Tennessee, a monument to all that was strict, Southern, and no nonsense. The only good thing about Humes High School on that hot summer day in 1952 was that 3:15 bell that had rung, and the kids were pouring out of the classrooms like frothy beer from a bottle. Now, 16-year-old Red West, having been bent into the classroom desk all day, suddenly got a little spring in his lanky gait as he headed for one of the really important things in life, football practice. To Red, school hours spent in the classroom were just pesky interruptions to his teenage life of raising heck or playing football or baseball. Red, naturally enough, got his name from a defiant thatch of carrot red hair, which he wore in a fashionable crew cut of the era. When time or money was short, the crew cut would often grow out, giving Red the appearance of an overused toothbrush. He was a good-natured kid, dreadfully shy at times, and easy to embarrass. Not very much different from Red West of today. Now, quick to go into battle with his fist if someone took too many liberties with his shyness. He had a reputation of being easy to get along with if left alone, but a sheer terror if rubbed the wrong way. Red was hardly every girl's idea of a school heartthrob. He was a freckle-faced and painfully skinny. See, this is not even written well. It's not even typed up well. Okay. Let's do this again. He was freckle-faced and painfully skinny as a legacy of a childhood. What? As a legacy of childhood rickets triggered by a dirt-poor Southern diet as a baby. This Steve Dunleavy is a hack of an author. A hack. I might have to just read it and try to discern what he's saying and then transcribe it to y'all. All right. Man. Excuse me. Y'all probably experiencing the same thing, all these allergies. But what he lacked in glamour, he made up for in his handling of muscle, footballs, and baseballs. Despite his spare build, he was one of the best centers Humes High School ever had produced. Now, Red stepped off at his locker to pick up his football gear. It was not yet 3:30, but the school halls were silent, empty of children. Red clattered eagerly down the polished brown asphalt hallway, and his eye was caught by a solitary figure leaning desperately against the wall. Red was struck by the boy's apparent loneliness. He recognized him as a kid in the year ahead of him, Elvis Aaron Presley. Red knew him to say hello, but nothing more. "17-year-old Presley was a nice kid, even if he looked out of place in the sea of kids with a crew cut and pink scalps all around him. He was face-to-face with a virulent case of acne." One second here, folks. Gotta get a drink of water over here. All right, so he had a violent case of acne. Whew, ain't we all been there? I've been there. I was there at 17 too. Worst thing in the world for all of us kids, right? When you had acne. All right, he had long brown hair cut in a ducktail fashion. The handfuls of Vaseline he put on it made it look much darker than it was. Long sideburns intruded into the acne. See this Dunleavy guy? Just being a jerk. He's being a jerk. He had a preference for leather jackets and would often tie a red bandana around his neck in the fashion popular with interstate truck drivers of the era. Despite the fact that Presley was a year senior to Red, in fact, in his graduation year, he broke with teenage protocol and addressed Red first. He muttered a shy, "Hi, Red." Red West's eyes missed a little even these days when he recalls that moment. Even just looking at him, I knew something was wrong. Something was bugging him. Red stopped his charge towards football practice and simply said, "Hi, Elvis. What's the matter? Something wrong?" Young Presley shifted uncomfortably and said, "There's 3 guys outside who are going to beat me up." Red was never slow to lift his dukes to anyone, but he was particularly prone to go into action against bullies. Without looking to see how many were waiting outside, Red nodded his head and said quietly, "Let's go check on it and see what it's about." Red led the way down the hallway, down some steps, and onto the sidewalk of Manassas Street. There stood 3 boys, high school seniors, like Elvis. It seemed that they had some objection about the way Elvis wore his hair. Now, there's no real way of telling when Red West is angry if you go by his voice. It's the same slow Tennessee country drawl that seems to take hours to complete a sentence. Red looked at the biggest boy there. "I understand you 3 fat asses are gonna whip this little guy's ass." I mean, maybe that's a little bit more like John Wayne, right? The big guy stuttered out an explanation. "Hey, man, it ain't your business. We're just going to talk to him, that's all." Red nodded. "Well, that's just fine. I tell you what, you and I will talk here for a while he walks home in peace, partner." Elvis turned quickly on his heels and sprinted home. The confrontation seemed to have ended. Well, the next day, Elvis sidled up to Red after class and said gratefully, "Gee, Red, thanks a lot yesterday." Now, of course, he didn't say. He was like, "Gee, Red, thanks a lot for yesterday." Red smiled just as shy. "Forget it, man." Red has perfect recall for those days. It seems the one way I remember it, someone was always picking on him. I don't know why. He was easygoing enough, quiet, well-mannered, was always respectful of his elders, and he never wised off at anyone. In many ways, he was a good kid. A lot nicer than some of those other ones that were around. But if Presley's mouth wasn't arrogant, his appearance was. He would spend hours in the school washroom, combing his ducktail to perfection. Whew. Got a little touch emotional there. It's interesting. So, I had something similar happen to me. And a guy with red hair named Chris Broussard stuck up for me. I was actually backed against a wall. I was maybe 15 or 16. Maybe I was 14 or 15. Some guys were kept threatening me. They're going to beat me up if I don't break up with my girlfriend. I was dating a girl named Crystal Pemberton, and she was very pretty, sweet, wore great perfume, always wore sweaters, and she was very, very popular. And if there was a rung on the ladder, and there's the top and there's a bottom, I was below the bottom. I was very poor. I was very impoverished. Came to school with grease on my hands and arms or tire marks because my dad, he took scrap metal, and so we'd go pick up scrap metal places, pick up people's engines and transmissions, and we'd pick up tires. And I didn't have running water. We didn't have city water. So I was less popular than popular. And, if Chris Broussard, who was a member of the football team as well, and basketball team, hadn't stuck up for me, I probably would have gotten beat up. I was skinny. I was a scrawny little guy, 120. Anyhow, and I'm just thinking here about Elvis in the bathroom combing his hair. Hair was important to me, too. It gave him, maybe it gave him a little bit of control. Maybe I'm going to comb my hair and be just like a movie star. And I'm going to get out of this. That combing his hair to perfection was a precursor for that desire that he had that got him out of the poverty that he had. He had poverty, and here he is. He probably was about the poorest person, one of the poorest people to go to this school. And even though Gladys and Vernon tried to see that he had things, he's a poor boy from Tupelo that lived in the projects, shake rag. And up in Memphis, wasn't much better. So, just that line about combing his ducktail to perfection. There's value in this book. It's not Steve Dunleavy. Guess what? He got lucky writing a line about that made me think. It's not his great writing. When he wasn't wearing a leather jacket and jeans. He was some outrageously colored pair of pegged pants. In the sea of a 1600 pink-scalped kid, if school, Elvis stood out like a camel in the Arctic. Intentional or not, his appearance expressed a defiance that his demeanor did not match. Red relates. It was that hair, man. It got him into all kinds of trouble. Now, if he had a regular haircut like the rest of us, he probably wouldn't have been bothered at all. But I guess the other kids thought he was trying to show off or something. That hair has always been his crowning glory. I would have never known any other human to take more time over his hair. He would spend hours on it, smoothing it, mussing it up, and combing it again. Despite the rescue operation by Red, he and Elvis never really got close. It was just a warm hello or a hi there, and we'd go our separate ways, said Red. We were in different classes, so we would see each other a little bit on and off. Now, he'd always go straight home after school, and he never fooled around in the streets, just straight home. Elvis tried out for the football team, but without much success. With a little more weight and a lot more confidence, he might have just made a good guard, but things didn't seem to work out. I think, says Red, that Elvis lasted on the squad about 3 weeks. The coach, which was a good guy called Coach Boyce, just couldn't stand Elvis and his long hair. Coach Boyce could have been a real tough son of a gun, and he was always on to Elvis to cut his hair. He just shamed E so much that Elvis finally just left the squad. I really felt sorry for him, said Red. He seemed very lonely and had no real friends. He just seemed to be different, unable to fit in. But I gotta admire him, said Red. All that razzing that the kids and some of the teachers gave him about his hair, Elvis would never cut it. That was his trademark. He went his own way without fighting back, but he wouldn't give in. He would rather have just died than cut that hair. That's another positive. We get a glimpse into Elvis. That's a true glimpse. You can tell Red talking about that, it's the truth. So I think that in some ways, Red thought, okay, well, I'm going to say these positive things about Elvis. I'm going to talk about what happened when he was younger, who he was, his character. Because I think that he wanted Elvis to see some good things in the midst of all these accusations and all the hurtful things that are about to come and that have already come. In fact, the way that Red remembers it, there was a time when Elvis thought his hair was going to be cut, and he had a look on his face that gave the impression he was going to die. It happened not too long after Red's first rescue operation of Elvis. In those days, when children were forbidden to smoke on the school grounds, the school washroom was the smoking gallery. It was there that all the swingers congregated to sneak their clandestine puffs away from the teacher's watchful eyes. Red walked in to take a leak. Now the place was full of smoke, and you could hardly see in front of you for all the smoke, Red recounts. But I could see far enough to notice that old E was in a whole heap of trouble again. About 4 or 5 guys had him in there, and they were holding him up and pushing him against the wall, and then grabbing him from behind. They were yelling and laughing and wising off at him and his hair. They decided they were going to cut his hair. Now, a smart guy usually keeps his nose out of other people's business. I knew the guys who were hassling Elvis. They were on the football squad. I suppose they got this haircutting business from old Coach Boyce. The guys who were giving Elvis a really hard time were not really bad guys, just a bit noisy and stuff. But when I saw Elvis's face, it just triggered something inside of me. I mean, we were kids, and they weren't going to kill him or anything. But there was a look of real fear on his face. He was looking like a frightened little animal, and I just couldn't stand it. When you're poor, very poor, you tend to let everyone look after their own troubles. But that face of Elvis's, I can see it to this day. And I saw that face like that many times later, and it always had the same effect on me. It just churned up something inside of me. It's like a child's face, and it asks for help. Red zipped up and strolled on over to the wall where the mob had pinned Elvis. "Now look," said Red, "this ain't going to do anyone any good. There ain't any need for this. If he likes his hair that way, well, no sense in hassling him. Now if you cut his hair, you're going to have to cut my hair too. And that's going to develop into something else." Once again, that lazy, quiet drawl had a dramatic effect. The mob let Elvis go. Now, before Elvis left, he darted a look at Red that said thanks a million times over. I think that's a good place to end. A lot of us have heard that story. Probably heard it from there, maybe heard it from something else. But that sets the tone, in a sense, for a couple things. And if you're still with me, I appreciate it. I know a lot of you guys make it to the end, MITTE. If you're still with me, this is kind of something that maybe some of y'all have thought, but if you haven't thought, it might give you a tiny bit of pause. Because this is why I'm only half and half mad at Red. Red is responsible for Elvis Presley being a star. 100%. If Elvis would have gotten beat up by those guys outside, he'd have been pulled out of Hume's High. His parents wouldn't have stood for it. He'd have came home all bloodied up, messed up, and he would have been homeschooled. He would have dropped out. Something would have happened. Second time as well, they would have cut his hair. That would have changed Elvis's psyche. Elvis protected Elvis's psyche. And I think Elvis was grateful. Elvis was a smart person. He was extremely smart. And I think he knew how much he really owed Red West. Red protected him when nobody else would. And so I think he looked the other way. And I think that Red and Sonny and those guys got into some trouble because they were ferociously trying to protect Elvis. And maybe they got a little too rough. But think about that. Okay? And it might... I'm not one for... I mean, even with Priscilla. Am I angry at Priscilla? No. She's annoying. It's annoying to me. Being too angry, is not good. Being angry at Red West, what good does that do us? But understanding this, in a sense, what happened, because they say that you can't forgive yourself until you forgive other people in life. So that's why I have to give Red some excuses here, because I'm upset at Vernon because Vernon didn't give them the pay Elvis told him. Elvis knew that Red had a family, that they had families. And he wanted to give them enough money to survive to get another gig. Because a lot of times, they weren't making a ton of money off Elvis. They really weren't. They were, given things. Houses, cars, watches, all that stuff throughout the years. But that doesn't equate to paying bills, the weekly money. They weren't getting rich off of Elvis that way. So when they lost their job, they had no income at the time. So Elvis wanted to give enough income for them to get by so he could maybe hire them back where they could find other gigs. And Vernon didn't follow Elvis's directions. And Elvis cut them off and didn't talk to him. So they were upset. And Red, knowing how much, in a sense, he felt like Elvis owed him, and maybe not financial, but the respect. that he'd given his whole life. And yes, he had some good times, a ton of good times, and got a ton of benefits. But at the same time, he chose a life to go protect Elvis, to follow Elvis, over his own dreams and aspirations. Although he did succeed with some stuff, like he wrote "Separate Ways" is one of the songs. I believe "If Every Day Was Like Christmas" was written by Red West as well. So he had some benefit there, but at the same time, it's like a relationship. Think about a relationship where you felt betrayed. That's how he felt. And when you felt like that, when you feel like that, you do some stupid stuff. You do. You say stupid stuff. You do stupid stuff out of the emotion. So that's my take for the day. Thanks for joining me on this. And I didn't say thank you at the beginning to all you subscribers, all you members. There's a couple new members. I'm going to do a little shout out video probably later on today. Some super thanks that have been left. And thanks for joining me on the Facebook page, the Joe Sends Rare Elvis photos over there. Till next time, take care of yourselves. Do not isolate. Make phone calls. This is great that you're interacting with me. Try to take an extra step if you're homebound or whatever. Maybe there's a senior center out there you can get to. If you're homebound because of health stuff, go sit outside on your porch. Wave at people. Have a quick conversation. Stuff like that. It means the world to your health and to your mind. TCB TLC, love you very much.